Singapore, responding to a Red Cross advertisement for field officers in rural Malaya. Medical social worker Jean Mary Gray crossed the oceans in 1953 and found herself in Pahang, in the thick of the Malayan Emergency, a guerrilla war fought by communist insurgents against state forces. Leaving her job in London's Brompton Chest Hospital, the plucky 27-year-old, who later married Singapore's first elected Chief Minister David Marshall, was hired to be part of a mobile medical team. Her year in Pahang was documented in letters to her family in Kent, England. These were recently rediscovered and have been published in a new book titled Jean Marshall's Pahang Letters, 1953-54, Sidelights on Malaya During the Emergency. The book, which was launched on Tuesday, November 14, sheds more light on the life of Mrs. Marshall, who is 91, as well as an era long gone, said historian and the book's editor, Ms. Mandakini Arora. Ms. Arora had been interviewing Mrs. Marshall for an ongoing project on English women who moved to colonial Singapore and stayed on to make it home when she learned about the letters. They had been in the possession of Mrs. Marshall's father and were returned to her when he died in 1979. Reading them, their historical significance struck Ms. Arora, 55. She said, "They serve as historical fragments shedding insight into the 1950s as the colonial state prepared for independence." She said Mrs. Marshall wrote in anthropological, sociological, and geographical detail, painting pictures in words. Her work in Pahang was rugged. At the time, the authorities had moved 500,000 people from the fringes of the jungle into guarded villages, resulting in an urgent need for support. Though it put her risk of attacks from insurgents, Mrs. Marshall said her role in the Red Cross was to help civilians and provide medical aid and social services. Speaking to the Straits Times, she noted that it was a pivotal year in other ways. "I came to this part of the world for a year and it became 64 years, she said. Mrs. Marshall became a Singapore citizen in 1960 and married a year later. She and Mr. Marshall, who died in 1995, had 4 children. Ms. Arora said, "The book is really about the intersections of histories, individual microscopic ones and bigger histories." The weekly letters had been saved by her father along with accompanying newspaper cuttings and photographs. They were full of her daily observations and experiences, capturing the sounds and colors of a totally foreign land, her light-hearted encounters with locals and their language, as well as her frustrations with administrative obligations that sometimes hampered her work with the people. Mrs. Marshall also wrote about endemic issues such as malnutrition. In one letter, she said people in the area mostly had a rooted objection to hospitals and any medical work meets with little response. She further noted that the children were sickly and malnourished because of their consumption of the criminally ubiquitous condensed milk, which kept well without refrigeration. The letters also showed how the young Jean had to go beyond her role as social worker, with a large chunk of her time spent raising funds when the Malayan Chinese Association stopped funding the work of the Red Cross there.